who are joining us here for the first time. My name is Catherine from Optimal Hong Kong office, and I will be your host today. So majority of us actually work in teams with others in our day-to-day work. A lot of times, whether it's from observing our own team or other people's team, we usually come with a question, of what makes a good team and how do we ensure team success? Now, one fundamental and very important element in a good team is that they are built from these unique individuals. So the idea is actually very similar to how an orchestra functions. So different instruments in the orchestra are like each team member's personality, whereby everyone gets to contribute to the team with their unique strengths and abilities to create a special piece of music. Now, when these personality works well together, they can create a well orchestrated performance. However, if one team member or more instrument starts to get out of sync, it can have a very prominent effect on the overall team performance. Now, there are a number of literature and research out there that highlights on top of capabilities and skill sets, which are also key factors, personality of individual team members can have a significant influence on team dynamics and ultimately the team performance as well. Hence, what is suggested is that perhaps to understand a team, a good place perhaps to start is to know each member of the team. So today we are very fortunate to have Ms. Krista Pederson, Managing Director, APAC, Ms. Nicole Dickie, Senior Consultant, APAC, and Ms. Anne-Marie Pamont, Regional Manager, APAC from Hogan, to share with us how personality data can be a transformative tool for team success. In the session today, we will explore on a few things, which includes what makes a good team, how we can leverage on personality data to facilitate and enhance team awareness, sharing of real-life case study using these team data information, okay? And of course, what are the best practices for accelerating team performance? So from Optimal Consultants, we do have my colleagues from different areas in this session as well to support. So as we are going through the presentation, if you have any questions, any comments about the topic, please feel free to click on the link. It will direct you to a Microsoft form to input your questions. These questions will be put together at the end where we will have a Q&A session. Okay, so we also have taken note of some questions during registration process as well. So without further delay, I will pass the time to Nicole and Krista now.
Catherine, thank you so much. It's so good to see you, and we are so grateful to be here with you and have the opportunity to share about elevating team performance, particularly looking at the role of personality and the opportunity to leverage personality insights for optimal performance. So you did a great job already kind of giving an overview of today's agenda. As you already mentioned, we're going to be looking at teams, kind of getting a baseline for the use of teams and what a team really is. We'll look at how we can leverage personality data itself. We'll introduce a framework for team strategic self-awareness, give some case studies, and then leave you with some best practices. Again, our goal is to help you gain the insights you need to achieve that top performance for your teams. And as Catherine already mentioned, in the chat, we've dropped a link. If you have any questions as we go throughout, please feel free to drop us a question and we'll get to that at the end. You can also see you can scan the QR code here to submit your questions. So we will go ahead and jump in. How many of you are familiar with Apollo 11? This was the US NASA's famous space project to get a man on the moon. You might be familiar with the feature film from the late 90s with the same name, or if you've seen Toy Story, Buzz Lightyear is actually named after the famous astronaut Buzz Aldrin. You might know Buzz Aldrin's name or Neil Armstrong's name because they're really the names and faces associated with the mission. They're the ones who walked on the moon. But there were countless amounts of individuals, years of preparation that went into this whole team's and NASA's success. Of course, this is a classic example of a high-performing team leading to the success of an organization. But what about you? Have you worked on a team that metaphorically landed on the moon? Maybe this was a current or former team at work, continually exceeding your KPIs. So as we get started today, we're going to give a baseline understanding in the state of teams in our organizations and how we kind of expect teams to change. Okay, so let's see. You can see here on the screen, we've got some data that we're going to pop up. Surprising to us was actually that over the past 40 years, we've seen a real significant increase in organizations using teams. In the state of today, we kind of think teams have always been leveraged, but actually in looking at Fortune 1000 companies, 40 years ago, only 28% of employees responded that they were at firms that leveraged teams. And today, that ratio is between 50 to 70% of employees saying they're at firms that leverage teams. So when you think of your own life and your own organization, how much time are you spending on teams? Working on a team-based goal, working on collaborative tasks, rather than doing autonomous work? If you're like most people in the world, likely your team working in meetings has increased, particularly after COVID. And according to the Harvard Business Review, collaborative work has actually increased by 50% over the past 2 decades. You can see on the screen here, over half of individuals reported that they spend at least 30% of their time in a team setting. That's quite a bit of our time at work. And importantly, and interestingly, happiness does not equal effectiveness. So in the world of Hogan Assessments, we have a schema for human behavior. We know that humans have evolved in groups and that they have different ways of getting along, getting ahead, and finding meaning. And so when we think about that within teams, just because teams get along does not mean that they're necessarily going to get ahead or actually achieve success and achieve the outcomes that leadership sets before them. So companies and organizations that are focused on team building, building social cohesion, things like icebreakers, things like getting to know you activities, that doesn't necessarily produce the ROI towards successful outcomes that those organizations might be expecting and hoping and thinking. Actually, winning helps people get along. So if leaders want their team to be happy with each other, they should be focused on aiming towards a cooperative, collaborative, common goal, or focusing on getting ahead. And so when we actually ask employees about their experience with teams, we find that 75% of employees rate teamwork as very important. Remember, goals are increasingly complex. People can't finish them on their own. But we also find 40% of employees share they don't collaborate enough with their colleagues. They don't have enough time to do those cooperative tasks to meet the goal. So at the aggregate level, what does this lead to? Only 50% of teams are actually effective, meaning that they're accomplishing the goal that leadership and organizations have set out for them to do. So instead of flipping a coin, we're going to be talking later about some ideas for how to increase your team's success. And when we look at most literature, and there's a lot of literature out there devoted to creating high-performing teams, and most of that literature is focused on a mix of skills and experiences. But this approach ignores one critically important piece that Catherine mentioned in her introduction, and that piece is personality. We know, based on the literature, that the success and failure of organizations is truly a function of its leadership. And because of leadership's critical role in organizational success, it's really essential to understand the characteristics that differentiate high-performing teams from low-performing teams. And at Hogan, we've been examining these insights over the past 40 years. So we're looking forward to sharing more with you. But first, we want to hear from you. So we've got another QR code here on the screen. We're going to do a really brief poll, okay? It's only 3 questions, and we're going to be talking about what makes a team. So I'm going to give you just a second, grab your phone, scan the QR code, excuse me. And I hope you're able to see.
Yes, we can see.
Okay, good. Thank you, thank you. Apologies, let me do this. Okay.
We
Great.
may need to put the QR code on for a little longer, I wonder.
Good, okay. And what you can do actually is at the top, you can see menti.com. If you go to menti.com, you can use the code here on the screen and join the poll that way. Okay, good. I can see some rolling in. Great. Fabulous. Okay, good. Common goal, common purpose, interdependence. Excellent. Joint efforts. Thank you. Thank you. Good. Okay, so we're seeing a lot of sharing the vision, sharing the goal, sharing the purpose, having each other's back. I like that a lot. Awesome. Thank you to those of you who have submitted. Look at that common goal. Give you guys just one more minute to add your thoughts on here, and we'll go to the next one. We've already got some people who know quite a bit about teams, that common goal. All right, next question for you. Do you work on a team? We'll say in the work context. Do you work on a team? All right. Okay, we do have one person doing solo work. Looks like most of us are working on teams. Okay, and then last question. Including you, how many people are on your direct team? Nice, okay. Great, so it's looking like most of us are on some mid-sized team, 5 to 6 individuals. Great. Give it one more minute. To those of you who participated, thank you so much for joining our poll, for the engagement. Oh, a couple of those on big, really large teams. I'm going to switch back to the PowerPoint now, but we really appreciate you joining in, sharing your thoughts. So thank you again. We're now going to just define our terms in terms of how we define a team. And at the most fundamental level, a team is a group of interdependent individuals working towards a common goal. So if we were to go back to the Mentimeter, you can see you really already got those fundamental elements of that common goal in particular. So teams have 3 or more people who are dependent on one another. And when we think back to the Apollo 11, NASA actually estimates that there were 400,000 people who made the moon landing possible. Scientists, engineers, technicians, astronauts. And you can imagine that the tasks that the engineers did or the tasks that the technicians did were dependent on the tasks that the engineers did, right? Interdependent tasks. And there was a huge amount of interdependence to land on the moon. In a really simple example on my team, Krista, me, and Marie, we engage in interdependent tasks all of the time, such as co-authoring a monthly newsletter. You know, I'll do the first draft, Anne Marie will do the second. We'll both be adding from our experiences. Krista will do a final review and approval. So, you know, there are lots of small ways that we can have interdependent tasks. And for those of you who said you had just 2 individuals on the team, we tricked you. So from our working definition of a team, it's 3 or more individuals. Next, as you already know, they share a common goal or a shared mission and purpose and vision, whether to the process and to the product. For Apollo 11, again, the purpose, the shared mission was getting individuals to the moon. And all of those individuals, employees, had a really specific view, common task, focus solely on getting them to the moon. And one thing that's interesting that we found is that evidence shows that the bond between people is actually a lot less important than the bond around a mission. And so, of course, Buzz Aldrin, Neil Armstrong, they're meeting colleagues face to face, right? They're visiting laboratories, they're visiting control rooms, but it's all about building those connections in the context of the common goal. They're not sitting there just doing icebreakers to get to know you, but really the context is the shared goal. Getting ahead is front and center. Next, they share a common leadership. At Hogan, we define that leadership's a resource for the team, and everybody's reporting to the same person. And then finally, teams share successes and failures with one another. So with Apollo 11, those hundreds of thousands of employees are integrated in their success or failure, right? But on the flip side, there might be some instances where success and failure isn't integrated. So for example, Krista, I, and Marie, we're on a larger international distributors team. And we have a colleague who's a regional director for Europe. And although we're technically on the same team, which we'll get to in a minute, we really don't have those interdependent tasks, and we really don't share a common success or failure. And that brings me into kind of mixing up teams versus groups. So too often, groups are mistaken as teams, and a group would be an individuals who could sit together in an office or even work in the same department, like I just mentioned. But for there to be a team, there really needs to be interdependent tasks and shared successes. Okay, so we've talked about the definition of a team, why it's important. Let's move on to personality. So when we think about teams, as Catherine teed up so well, we have to remember that teams are just made up of individual employees. So we're going to start at that individual level when we consider personality data. But as we go through, I really want you to start thinking about, okay, yes, we have the personality at the individual level, but then what does that look like at that team level? So at Hogan Assessments, we have a really comprehensive view of personality, holistic and deep. So first we start with the bright side of personality using the Hogan Personality Inventory, or the HPI. And this is really about everyday strengths and weaknesses. It's kind of how you show up on a day-to-day basis. And this assessment really answers the question, can you do the job? Can you do the job you're applying for or you're developing for? The next is the dark side of personality, represented in the Hogan Development Survey, or the HDS. And this looks at overused strengths. That could derail your success. This often happens when we're stressed, under pressure, or maybe even complacent or bored, or generally not self-monitoring. And this answers the question, what's going to get in your way? What's going to inhibit your own success and the success of your team? And then finally, we have the inside of personality, the motives, values, and preferences inventory, MVPI, and that's looking at your goals, your drivers, what's waking you up and getting you to work the next day. And it answers the question, what type of culture are you going to create? And likely, what kind of unconscious biases might you have in your own leadership style? And so and we think about this in the context of relationships. For those of you dating, married, long-term partners, we could say that the bright side of personality is you on your first date. You're showing up, you're putting your best foot forward, likely how you're going to act in a day-to-day setting. The HDS, the dark side of personality, is you together after 6 months or a year, where your true self is coming out and you're not really trying to put your best face on anymore. And then finally, the MVPI, the inside, is really the values that keep you together. A silly example, but really in total, we can get this really in-depth picture, holistic picture of someone's personality. And when we talk about personality in the context of Hogan, we're really talking about reputation. And that's the way that others view you. And we know that people's reputation, their personality, really has an impact on how they behave. Our personality underlines our behaviors, our actions, the way that we react to stressors, and the way that we interact with each other at work and at home. Personality data can give us insights into how we're making decisions, how we're executing business, how we are managing conflict, and if we're a leader, how we're managing people. It can also get us information about strengths and weaknesses, which we'll talk a lot more about today, as well as the kind of culture we'll create. And finally, the type of leader that we might be in our potential leadership effectiveness. So this really brings us to a pretty fundamental concept that we're going to be talking about today called strategic self-awareness. Now, in psychology, there's a pretty widely held belief about self-knowledge, becoming aware of your own thoughts, emotions, strengths, maybe that you didn't even know that you had. And we could call this getting in touch with your feelings, getting in touch with your inner child. And this concept has been really important to traditional therapy and has made a really, big impact. But from a workplace performance perspective, we would actually say that may not be the most useful or helpful thing. And we'd argue that strategic self-awareness is actually going to be more impactful for changing your behavior in the workplace. And this has three components. The first is understanding your own strengths and limitations. So that's that baseline. The next is understanding how you and your strengths and weaknesses compare to others. How do you stack up against someone else? And then finally, understanding that we need to adapt some of our tendencies and behaviors in order to increase effectiveness. And that's where that individual and then in future team effectiveness can come into play. So really, this is knowing your strengths and weaknesses and how you stack up to others. And we can see that self-awareness is really important for success. So let's first take a look at someone who lacks self-awareness. Likely, they're going to miss feedback signals. They might not be listening or dismissing feedback. I had an experience with a former client. We were working on a project. I gave several messages that this project was at risk because of some struggling communication, miscommunications. But this person would not listen to my message. They might ignore feedback or being unwilling to admit the flaws. I worked with an executive once who said to me, "Do I really need to do a 360? Last time I did it, the feedback was all wrong." Okay. They may be slow to change. They might not see the importance of changing behaviors, or they might fall into old patterns, especially when stressful times arise. And finally, that outcome is that they might not succeed. Going back to my former client, the project ended up getting pulled because that client would not listen and they were unwilling to change their behavior. But that is not the path for everyone. So those who do have self-awareness and seek feedback often do it proactively from multiple forms and multiple sources. But not only that, they can also accept feedback. And they understand that those around them know more and can give them insights into their blind spots. They act on feedback, which we know takes motivation and effort over time. But by acting on feedback over time, people begin to notice changes. And then finally, through that virtuous cycle, they can continue and really find success, making better decisions, influencing outcomes, engaging employees, and making organizations generally better. So that's really at that individual level, and I'm going to turn it over to Krista to introduce us to this idea at the team level.
Yes, thank you so much, Nicole. That's a wonderful way to think about how the differences between people who miss feedback and people who are able to accept feedback and make a change based on that. And it's really no different for teams. One thing that we highly encourage when working across teams is self-awareness for teams. And so how would we define strategic self-awareness for teams? Again, it's very similar to how we define self-awareness for the individuals. So it's really understanding your strengths and weaknesses from an external perspective, not just what your team thinks it's good at, but also what other people would say your team is good at and where there are opportunities for change and growth. And then also understanding from a team's perspective, the diversity of strengths and challenges within the team and how that team also interacts with external teams. And so you can kind of think of it as a twofold process, is understanding the team itself on its own, and then understanding the team within the broader organizational context. And then finally, understanding how the team adapts their behavior so that they can increase their effectiveness in any situation. So for example, I once worked on a team that was really highly ambitious. They had a lot of ideas, and they were really, we were trying to push our ideas out to the broader organization, which sounds like a wonderful idea. However, within that team, we were very vocal in how we thought things should be. And so our team itself was very effective on our own, but in the context of the broader organization, we had to work a little bit on communicating and determining how best to communicate our ideas to the rest of the team, because we had feedback from other teams saying, you're really quite abrasive in some of your messaging, and we want to help you, but we are very struggling with understanding kind of your goals on this. Is your goals going to help our goals as well? And so for that team, it was really important, not that we only understood the dynamics of the team itself, but also how our reputation may be with other teams. And so it's really a twofold process here. It's understanding the composition of the team, and also not forgetting that there's individuals on the team. And then there's also understanding how that team acts and interacts with other teams across the organization. And again, like Nicole has mentioned several times, the whole goal here is to create more effectiveness. Making sure that the team is able to be more effective, and ultimately effectiveness for the entire organization. So one concept that I'd like to present to you today is in thinking about how we can be more effective at the team. There's really two levels here. And one is describing the team, describing what the team's strengths and weaknesses are. And then the so what, prescribing what should be done on top of that. So when we are looking at team level interventions, a lot of times we get stuck at the descriptive level. And that's really great to be able to describe a team. But as practitioners who are trying to help teams become more effective, let's not forget to talk about the so what. And the great thing about Hogan is that Hogan is able to help teams at a more prescriptive level. So not just thinking about, hey, how can the team what does the team look like? You know, what do other people say the team looks like? But we can also be prescriptive to helping diagnose, you know, what can be done about that. And that's also something that Optimal can help you with as the distributor who has worked with a lot of teams across the region here. So with regards to Hogan's framework for looking at team strategic self-awareness, you will note that this is very related to the model that Nicole described earlier with the bright side, dark side, and inside. So we look at teams from three different perspectives. The first perspective is the role of the individuals actually on the team. So, and then adding that up in a conglomerate data to look at, you know, what kind of roles does this team have? Like how many, and I'll describe this more clearly in a moment, but which team roles are mostly predominant within this team. And this is linked back to the Hogan personality inventory, for those of you who are familiar with Hogan, or the bright side of personality, the strengths and weaknesses on an everyday basis. And for the team roles, we actually, even though we don't use HPI scales directly, we look at these roles that we find are very effective for a team. And it's very important that we have diversity. However, we do note that depending on the team and the purpose of the team within an organization, we may see more roles than other roles on the team, but diversity is also very important. The second aspect we look at is the team derailers, and this is directly linked to the HDS, or the dark side of personality, and I'll go over this a little bit more, but this is really understanding the watch-outs for the team as a whole. And then finally, we're looking at the team culture, which is related to the inside of personality, or the motives, values, preferences inventory when it comes to Hogan. And this is really understanding what the team values, and because the team will make decisions, they will go about doing their work based on what they value. So it's very important that we understand the team culture if we are going to motivate people to change. So first, I'll share a little bit more about the team roles. And like I said, it's really important that we have some diversity across the team. However, we do acknowledge that certain teams will probably have stronger roles, or more people in certain roles, depending on the purpose of the team. But the first role is really results focused. And these are people who are very ambitious, kind of like the team that I talked about that I was on before. They're really trying to take charge, push for results. You know, they're quite forthcoming in what their goals are, and they're really pushing for very difficult goals and ambitious goals. So this is results-driven role. Especially on teams that are sales focused, or maybe even leadership teams, we would expect people to have higher results, a team with more people with this results role. The second role is pragmatism, and these are people who are practical, willing to tell it like it is, thinking about how we can actually get projects done. There's also the innovation role, and these are people who are really curious about things. How can we do things better? They're willing to adapt to the new conditions. They're probably the ones that have already started using ChatGPT from the time that it came out. So this is the innovation role. And if you can think, on teams that are more focused on R&D, or maybe even marketing product roles, maybe we'll have a few more people that are higher on innovation. The fourth is the process roles. And these are the people who are really concerned about making sure that we have a process for things. They're the good organizational citizens. They're people who are really focused on the details of execution and making sure that we're building systems and processes so that we can support the results that we are trying to drive. And then finally, we have the relationships people. And I think all of us have worked with people who really care about the team, and they're caring about the team morale and making sure that we have good relationships across the team. So when something goes wrong in the team, they're the people who are, asking, oh, how can we get people back together again? And so you can see that all of these different team roles, it's possible that a team has all of these roles. We've also seen teams that don't have any of these roles. And in which case the question is, what is your team brand? And so it's really important that for any effective team, you do have some diversity, although it will tell you a really interesting picture about what the team looks like and give you hints as to where you can go, depending on how many people you have in these different roles. And we'll share some case studies in a moment so you can see how this plays out in real life. The second aspect is that we like to look at for teams is the team derailers. And I don't know how many of you are familiar with Hogan. There's probably some people who have gotten certified, maybe some people who are not as familiar. But again, like Nicole said, our derailers is based on the Hogan Development Survey, or the dark side of personality. And these are overused strengths that can become weaknesses or problems in someone's career. And we don't only see that at the individual level, we also see it at the broader team level. And so with this model, you can actually look at what the team, what the risk areas for that team and that reputation. So within here, if you see that derailer picture here, that 76 number is actually the average of what the team score is. And so you can see that with this model, you are able to look at what actually the team derailer is. And again, we have, for those not so familiar with the Hogan Development Survey, we have really three areas that we look at. The first is moving away from people. And so these are behaviors that actually cause people to be pushed away. So for example, if you have a team that is high on the reserved scale, people who are high on reserve tend to be more closed off, emotionally unavailable. And so if you have an entire team that is high on reserved, then that becomes problematic if they are trying to share some of their initiatives with the rest of the organization. On the moving against people scale, these are behaviors that actually, it's more the fight mechanism. So these are behaviors that cause people to be in more conflict with others. So let's take mischievous, for example. Mischievous is a scale that looks at people who test the limits, who use charm to get their way, and consequently, it feels very manipulative. So if you have a team that is all high on or has a high average on mischievous, other teams across the organization will probably view their behavior as somewhat manipulative, and that will be difficult to ultimately get their work done if others are just viewing that team as being overly testing the limits and not willing to follow the rules. And then finally, we have the moving towards people scales, and this is diligent and dutiful. And within these scales, they are going to try to use behaviors to get along with others and to listen to authority. Sometimes we call it the kiss up, kick down scales, because they're constantly listening to authority and what authority wants, but it makes it very difficult for the rest of their team members. So for example, if we have a team that is very high on dutiful, They are all going to be listening to what the leadership team wants, what the boss wants, but they're not going to really manage what may be good for the team. So they may bite off more than they can chew. They may be taking on too much and not being willing to be realistic about if we can actually accomplish these goals. So you can see that looking at the team derailers is really important for understanding the reputation of the team and where are the areas that might make us ineffective when working with other departments or even working together as a team. And then finally, we're going to look at team culture. And again, this is based on the motives, values, preferences inventory. And this is looking at what motivates the team, what they like, what kind of work environment or culture they are going to create as a team. And so again, that score is an average of the entire what the team looks like. And if 50% of the members or more are high on this, then you're going to have a team driver. Also, we look at if the scale is low. And so if no one has this value, that also tells us something about the team culture. And I'll give you 2 examples here. So for example, number 1, if the team is high on recognition, they are going to take on projects that allow them to be seen and shine, and they're probably going to support each other by giving each other recognition. And so it's really important to know, that this aspect of the team, how do we motivate them? If we want them to change in their high on recognition, give them a project that allows them to be noticed, right? And incentivize them in that way. Likewise, if we have, for example, a team that is lower on altruistic, that also tells you something about the team culture. This is going to be a team that expects people to figure it out on their own. They're not going to go out of their way to help others because they think that we should try it on our own first. They prefer that rugged individualism in a way. And so if you know that about the team, using, you can help the organization in this way as a way to motivate them to change is not going to work. So it's really important that you understand their drivers in order to understand the overall culture of the team and how they're going to go about making decisions and how they're going to go about changing their behavior and the ways in which they're going to try to be effective. It tells you quite a lot. So finally, if you are really interested in this model, we do have the team report. You can talk to Optimal about this. The team report shares all of this information for a particular team. And like Nicole said, you need at least 3 people to be considered a team. So if you have 3 or more members, you can actually generate this team report. And what's really interesting is we also share the individual scores within the team. So if you see on this team report, yes, the last page there shows the individual roles and the individual scores for each team member. And so you can see the team member on the broader team, because it's important to remember, even though we're looking at aggregate data, we still have individuals who are on the team. And so each individual may not be exactly what the average of the team is. And so this can give you a lot of information how you can develop the individuals to be more effective in their team and work better across the team for working towards the team goals. But it also gives you a great picture of what the overall team is. So a couple of thoughts, how can you implement this to make it, to help your organization become more effective? It helps improve collaboration and communication within your team, position towards a goal. Again, like Nicole has mentioned several times, it's really interesting. The goal should not be for your team to get along and collaborate. The goal should be for your team to be effective, and then you will naturally get along and collaborate. So again, the ultimate goal is to maximize your team's effectiveness and the overall organization's profitability. What we always encourage people at Hogan is not to have internal competition, but to look externally for competition. A lot of people and even teams are trying to compete with each other, to become the most effective team at the organization. But that's not really our goal here. Our goal is not to be the best team, right, within the organization. Our goal here is not, to even, help ourselves or the individuals on the team, advance in their careers. The ultimate goal is to win against the external competition. And so if we get our team members focused on external competition outside of the organization, winning being the best on the market instead of internal competition, then that will actually help with our political situation. So also this will help remove barriers to alignment and efficiency. If the team is all speaking one language and seeing these results of what their team looks like, it helps people get aligned around a goal. Helping people understand what their team composition is can also help understand where the team needs to go. So for example, if I had mentioned on that team earlier that was super results focused, if that team actually wants to progress, they can not only be just results focused, they need to probably have people who are process focused and more pragmatic, and maybe who also are relationship focused, so they can help with the relationships across the organization. So in thinking about our current team, we should also be thinking about where the team needs to go. And so using the team report gives you a good description of, where we are now, but it can also help you understand, to become more effective, what new team members do we need to hire? Where do we need to improve within the team? Where can we improve? But also, when we're hiring for new people, what kind of roles do we need them to play? And then finally, it's aligning the team's personalities with team goals. And then you can ask, experienced team facilitators to help you draft some custom facilitated insights. So again, Optimal has wonderful years and decades of experience working with teams. So you can ask them to run a team session for you if you need. So for this next section, we would love to share a couple of real world case studies. So to kind of help you understand how this plays out in a real life scenario. So I will be sharing the first case study, which I was actually involved in. And so I was working with a manufacturing plant in Asia, and me and the local distributor here had a situation where the plant came to us and they said, hey, we have this newly onboarded manager. We have a completely new management team. We also need to create this manufacturing site, hire a bunch of people, and double our output within the next 5 years. Currently, the plant that we have is very, very effective at managing. They're very, very effective at getting the work done in a very consistent way. However, what they're not so effective at is leading and influencing across the organization. And we hope that this plant, in order to get us where we need to go in the next 2 decades, we have our high growth industry, we need them to be more innovative. We need them to be more leader-like in how they are running the plant and actually influencing others. And so again, good performers now, but we need them to go from good to great, and we need them to be more effective at leading the organization and not just delivering. And so with this, they had used Hogan before and were familiar, and they asked us, how can we help? And so for this intervention in particular, we suggested using the team report, because this is a new team, and we wanted to work with them a little bit more on helping them support their goals. And so in looking at the team results, first of all, with this project, we actually did one-on-one feedbacks for each individual within the team. And this was really important specifically for this team, because we got to hear from the individuals. We got to familiarize them. Not everyone had taken Hogan, a few had, but not everyone had. So we had the one-on-one feedbacks to give them feedback on their individual results. But at the time, we also had a structured interview during the feedback session in which we asked their opinions about the broader team, so we could hear from the individuals their perspective before everyone talked as a broader team. So it was kind of an interesting project that we had there. And when we went to the team session, we generated the team report. It was really interesting because, the feedback that the plant had given, or that the overall boss had given, was they needed to be more innovative and leader-like. And so if we see the team scores with regards to their roles, it's very clear that they are an innovative team. They're an innovation-focused team, but where they probably needed to look a little bit closer at is that results. The results is quite low, as is the pragmatism. And so it wasn't that they were not innovative, it's that they need to work on being more leader-like and influential about their innovations. And so even with the relationships being a little bit lower, they're probably having a difficult time communicating their results and communicating kind of their ideas and what they're doing to the rest of the organization. So then we went on to look at their HDS scales. And here, again, if you look at the scales, this is their overall scores, but from moving away and moving against these two had some distinct trends here. So they were very, very high on the reserve scale. And if you remember, I just had mentioned earlier that reserved as being emotionally unavailable, maybe even shutting down under stress and pressure. And so this team was not being proactively communicative. So like they were not communicating proactively. Additionally, they were high on the bold and imaginative scales. So with bold, it is taking feedback, listening to others. So they're likely that their reputation is that they're a team that does not take good feedback from others and is not willing to admit when they're wrong. And then with the imaginative score, this is a team that is coming up with a lot of impractical ideas. And they're not taking the time to communicate about that, which is really interesting because this is also aligned with their roles. So very innovative. Yes, thank you, Nicole. Very innovative, but not very results driven, not very pragmatic at all. And also with the relationships being lower, they're not doing a lot of proactive communicating about, what needs to happen. So the final part is really looking at the culture of their team. And this is, for this team, it was very important in trying to help them motivate and thinking of ideas of where they can change as a team. So their two high scores were altruistic. So this team is very, very willing to help others. Notice the affiliation score, however, the affiliation score is quite low. So again, even though they're willing to help others, with that high on reserved and low on affiliation, they are not really doing this as a team or a group effort. They're doing this, they're trying to help people on their own, and they're not really thinking about how communication really might be able to help them help others. And so then the other score that we see, they're very, very high on science. And so they really our data-driven team. And again, that fits in with that high on innovative roles, high on imaginative. So they're coming up with a lot of ideas. But after seeing the results of this team report, the team really had a great conversation around how they can become more leader-like. And so again, innovation is not a problem for this team. What the problem was is communicating their goals and being very, very clear on where they need to go with that innovation. And so within this team session, we had a great facilitation, and the team was able to set a couple of very clear goals on what they wanted to do by the next year. And one of the goals was actually to create a platform for knowledge sharing, so that they can use these ideas and everything that they're doing and actually communicate with the broader organization. So that was one very specific outcome that we worked with them on. We actually started with a team session, and then the next year we had another team session, because as you know, in Asia, the team actually, a few members came, a few members left, and so we saw a readjustment. There wasn't huge differences in what the team organization was, but they did give us feedback saying that this team session was very effective, and their knowledge sharing initiative that came out of this team intervention was very helpful in setting themselves up for success in in doubling their production and becoming more leader-like in what they wanted to do. So again, the results of this study is there was enhanced knowledge sharing within the organization that set up this team to be more leader-like and not just being seen as managers. Number two, it did increase the goal alignment with the team. It was a great way that the team themselves can look at the overall goals of the team, look at the profile of the team. And then another thing within the conversations that we discussed was using the individuals who did have those relationship roles and using the individuals who were better at being pragmatic and process focused to support the overall goals of the team. So again, it's not just looking at the team at the broader level, but it's also important to acknowledge the differences in the roles of the individuals. And maybe for this team, everyone was so innovation focused, but giving a little bit more room for those individuals who have the lesser roles to take a bigger role when it came to being process focused or being a bit pragmatic about the goals that they're doing. So overall, we did see accelerated business success, and this organization, this plant, is continuing to grow at the pace that they wanted. The recommendation going forward is to check in every 6 months to realign towards the goals and create new goals. Because this, again, the knowledge sharing platform was just one very specific thing that they agreed to. But as part of developing the team, we do recommend that you do choose very specific small goals and then meet from time to time to realign, set further goals so that the change is incremental. It's very unrealistic to expect, huge change, one point of time and for that to stick. The research shows that it's really more effective if you are using incremental goals along the way and then adjusting and readjusting. And Nicole will share a little bit more about that. But first, Nicole, would you like to share the second case study?
Thank you so much. I love that case study, Krista. Thank you. So we have another case study for you. This is looking at a global supplier in New Zealand. So you can see here on the screen, there was a new CEO with a new mandate from the board that they needed to double the size of the business. Sounds kind of similar to the manufacturing plant in Asia, but totally different scenario. And this new leadership team, led by the new CEO, was going to be leading a really skeptical and science-based organization into a future with really high productivity goals and obviously really high expectations for commercial outcomes. So in this situation, we worked with a leadership team of 8, including the new CEO, to explore how this leadership team could leverage their strengths and change their behaviors in order to implement this new board mandate. So a little bit about this team. They were really strongly goal-oriented, very competitive, ambitious, and driven. And when this CEO came into power, if you will, it felt like a jolt of energy through the organization, like a huge kind of shot of energy. And the leadership team was making changes. They were raising targets, raising the standard of expectation, holding people accountable, which meant some non-performers exited, to be expected. And the team was kind of, exciting to be around and connecting with others and with the wider organization. But there were some other behaviors that started to emerge that were causing resentment. So first, the team was not very good at listening to feedback or very receptive to feedback. They spent a lot of time in broadcast mode. And then the goals that they were kind of setting and aligning around seemed to stack on. They were committing to things, but there was really not much of a process or commitment to the practical aspects of that. And then that leadership team, that C-suite, was also committing to kind of pet projects and getting bored and changing their minds a bit. So the new CEO, it just wasn't going as the board had expected. And so luckily, the CEO was astute enough to realize this, turned to Hogan and our authorized distributor at the time for a team intervention. So we've got the team scores here for you. Much like Krista mentioned, we recommend starting out at that individual level with one-on-one debriefs, just so individuals can really understand their own reports and scores first, to then move to the context of the team. But when we're looking at the team scores, you can see here the team excelled at driving results, an 88 on the results side. This leadership team really had the tendency to move things forward in a really big way. But as you heard from some of the feedback at the beginning, there were also gaps. Not really a focus on resourcing, sequencing, procurement, really any kind of sustainable process or procedure. And you can see here that the team is quite low on process or actually being able to kind of implement those ideas. And when we look at, you can see here we have the HDS and the MVPI, so the derailers and the values on the screen. The team has a very distinctive dark side risk of being colorful. Krista didn't get to give an example of colorful, but for those of you, if you don't know, colorful, those who score high on colorful tend to be very high profile. They enjoy being recognized for their accomplishments. They enjoy calling attention to themselves, maybe even multitasking. But others can find them a little bit hard to work with because they tend to be self-promoting, overcommitted, easily angered, quickly bored. So no wonder they were in broadcast mode, and no wonder they were having some trouble listening to feedback, as well as having all those pet projects that they were sponsoring. And as you might guess from that derailer of high colorful and the previous slide, they also shared that core value of recognition. And those who score high on recognition tend to care about, being the center of attention, having their accomplishments acknowledged in public, being really highly visible. So again, makes sense about the broadcast mode. And so what happened in the story? Well, again, the CEO, had that awareness that He needed to listen to the grumbling and notice that there were some unhealthy patterns forming in the team. And so by a team report, individual reports, and having this team intervention, they could see this really clear picture of behaviors and dynamics that were coming from this unique mix of members. And they made some commitments. So the CEO actually instituted a 2-year program of team meetings in which they were reviewing their collective and individual profiles, reflecting on improvements, reflecting on gaps, and even studying feedback from the organization. So there was this mechanism to get feedback from those underneath them and from the organization. And so this virtuous cycle really led to longer-term accountability for those individuals on that team and continued development, which led to increased and enhanced performance. So by the CEO taking a really strategic view of goal setting and goal alignment, he continued to make sure that the whole team was driving at the same goal, which again, being having that focus on the common goal and the focus on that getting ahead. And so through that virtuous cycle, they made continuous personal and team progress, which did lead to that organizational and financial success that the board expected. Okay, so now that we've looked at some case studies, we're going to just close with a couple of best practices slides. So what you see here is what Krista has alluded to. And this is really this virtuous cycle, if you will, of small incremental feedback over time, changes over time. And so you can see that if you want to accelerate your team performance, one really good way to do that is to increase team strategic self-awareness. On the left-hand side, you can see these two facets of getting data. The first is Hogan's 3 core assessments, and the second is the Hogan team report. And with those in combination, it gives such a good picture of individual and team reputation as the basis of the conversation, as the basis of the team intervention. And so next, if you move across the screen, you can see that there is this opportunity to build awareness. Again, by using that data, by using other sources like 360s, et cetera, just really gaining that understanding of your own strengths and areas of opportunity, how you and the team stack up within each other and between teams, and really then targeting behaviors, small behaviors, things that you are motivated to change, that take little effort to change, that you can sustain over time. I think in the case study from the manufacturing plant in Asia, it's a great example. They had a really small behavior of, knowledge sharing. And that was what they focused on. And they focused on it consistently. Everyone had that same goal. And over time, they were able to make a big impact in coming across more leader-like, as coming across more goal-oriented and driven, and really showing their organization and their leadership that they did have really great innovative ideas. And over time, those behavior changes can lead to a change in your reputation, a change in the way that other people are viewing you and viewing the team. But as the CEO in my case study did, it really takes seeking feedback. It takes seeking feedback from multiple sources, multiple ways, at multiple time points. And then over time, that can lead to those internalized changes, even changing the way that the team is viewing itself. Before I move on, I will say it one more time. We know this is not an easy process. We know that this takes time, but in order to really achieve long-term change and long-term success, this is a great way and a great model for change at the individual and team level. Okay, so one final thought, and I think a question came in on this too. So what about groups? So maybe you're like the international distributors team I mentioned, where we don't have really shared successes and we don't necessarily have interdependent tasks. What could you do to support groups? Well, first, we'd recommend focusing on individual development. Again, that's going to be the most important thing, that individual self-awareness and development. If you did want to look at the aggregate, we'd recommend considering looking at the values, the MVPI, to be able to see, what are shared values, likely what will retain employees, because we all care about that. But in general, there would be less importance on the aggregate and more importance on the individual. Okay, So we'll close with just a few thoughts. When it comes to developing the team, first and foremost, we recommend starting at the individual. The individual's personality data is going to be the foundation for strategic self-awareness. And when we are doing a team intervention, it's really wonderful to get to start with the individual, to hear their feedback in those one-on-one debriefs, to get their feedback on the team as well. Especially if you have an individual who is not aligning with the team derailers or the team values, it can be especially helpful to get their perspective. And this really sets the basis of understanding at the team level. Oh, Krista, you're muted.
I'm sorry. The second part is to measure the team level reputation, like I had mentioned, to both increase intra-team and inter-team insight. So again, looking at what the team as a whole looked like, and looking at like the group averages and the aggregate data from the team, to understand internally how you can align your goals and work on becoming more effective team together, but also across different teams. So talking about how you can become more effective as a team across the overall organization. So it's not just within the team, but it's also across teams in the organization. So how your team members can work together towards a common goal, and then how you as an overall team can work more effectively as a team within the organization.
And then finally, just that continuous cycle of development for team self-awareness through behavioral modifications and feedback. And in the long term, this has the opportunity for changes to team's reputation and increased team performance.
Great.
Okay, with that, the QR code again for questions, it's in the chat as well. I'll stop sharing and turn it back to you, Catherine.
Thank you both. It's very insightful information. So just a recap here, yes. So you saw the QR code from Nicole, and also in the chat as well, there will be the link to the Microsoft Teams in terms of Microsoft Forms. So if you have any questions, please feel free to click on either the QR code or the link to submit your questions. But while you're doing so, we actually have some questions collated as the presentation went on. So I guess it'll be a good idea to start from those questions first. So the first one we see here, very good questions from one of the participants. So most organizations and leaders don't understand the difference between the teams versus groups. How should we help them understand what is a team and the importance in investing in team effectiveness?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think obviously communication is a key. This is actually a question we get quite a lot, is how can I influence upward? How can I influence my leaders to be able to understand the importance of doing these, the importance of personality, the importance of teams, even the importance of understanding like teams versus groups. And essentially, it comes down to the return on investment that you're making into the organization. And we know that the way that you'll influence different leaders might be different. If you understood their MVPI, what they really care about, the culture that they're creating, you can speak to that. So it's difficult to give broader advice, but I do think that starting to socialize these ideas and talking about the difference, and also talking about the difference that that these interventions can help making the team more effective is very important. I think from my observation, I think intuitively people think that, oh, having an icebreaker or a team intervention where we get along better is what a lot of leaders think will work. But I think it's really important that we help them understand that actually, just getting along as a team or helping teammates communicate better together is not actually going to help the organization. So maybe sharing some data about, what actually makes an effective team with leaders will help them understand the importance of focusing on more team effectiveness rather than just like team members getting along. Because there is a lot of investment made into like team building, team retreats, things like that. But unless it's geared towards a purpose, then it's probably not going to be helpful for anything other than just making sure that we're friends as team members, which you're, in our opinion, you're probably wasting your time and money, because if you were gearing that towards a goal, it will A, help the organization, and B, help people become friends anyway. So, and Nicole, I don't know if you have anything else to add.
No, that's great. Thank you, Krista.
Thank you. So this is a bit linked to the first question as well in terms of the value. So in situations, if there are high turnover rates, I guess either organization or the team, how much value is there in investing in team interventions then?
I think that's a great question. And I would argue that actually investing in a team intervention can really help with retention because values are such a facet. And again, because when people are working towards that common goal, you're getting ahead, maybe more likely to be engaged, maybe more likely to feel satisfied with your work. So I would say this is actually an area of opportunity for HR practitioners to intervene in those high turnover situations by investing in not just the individuals, but how the individual links to the team that they're on, in hopes to that increase retention.
And that's not to say that we don't acknowledge that there probably will be some turnover. Actually, in Hogan's team report, we do account for that. We allow for a few changes over the course of like 6 months to a year. But there might be other interventions you need to be taking if, it's constantly, 50, 60% turnover. But to Nicole's point, really, if you do a team report and you see that there's a few individuals whose values are just completely different from the team, it's more likely that those individuals are going to turn over and not be there within the next 6 to 12 months unless you have a conversation and can figure out how to meet their values as well.
Great call out. Yeah.
Thank you. So the third question here goes back to more of an individual level or development. So number one is how can you increase self-awareness? And secondly, should developmental changes happen at the individual or team level?
All of the above. Though those are really great questions. I think on the first, the increasing self-awareness, really data and feedback. So leveraging a valid and reliable personality assessment can be a great way. Leveraging a 360, just really getting insights from others about someone's reputation can be a really good starting point for strategic self-awareness. And really, with a lot of other personality assessments, there's this idea of identity. How do I view myself? Hogan's looking at reputation, how others view me. And so there's that opportunity to bridge that gap. How am I viewing myself versus how are others viewing me? And through, whether that's through this use of data and self-reflection or working with a coach, working with someone from Optimal, over time, being able to understand, what are my strengths and weaknesses? How do I compare to others? And what do I need to change in order to be more effective? So that's really that first step. And then I think in terms of levels, you can see in the case study that I mentioned, that CEO was ensuring that people were working on development tasks at the individual and at the team level. So there's a lot going on there. It is a high investment in that scenario. But I think both can be really helpful and effective. But Krista, what would you add?
Yeah, I would just say that best practices is to, like we mentioned several times, is not ignore the individual level, work with individuals, but also to level up even more. I think more sophisticated organizations are doing both. And I think, again, it's really maybe too idealistic to say every organization can do this, but consider your organization's maturity level and implement where you can. And as you grow and as your organization does become more mature, then it does make sense to look at both individual and then at the team and group level. So start with the individual, but you're leaving a lot on the table if you're only looking at individuals, because they do work and collaborate in a team, as Nicole said, and teams are more and more important as AI is developing. The individual development is still very necessary, but teams really does help you look at it at a different level and help your organization become more competitive. So both, if possible.
Okay. So another question here. How long should a team be working together before you can administer a team report? Is there like a time frame?
No, my recommendation, my recommendation would be, as long as you have a goal that you're trying to accomplish, any stage is okay. It can be helpful to align people and get, like the example that I gave for the manufacturing plant that I work with, the team had just started and they were even hiring some new team members at the time. And so we use this as a kickoff session so that we could actually help them be more effective in accomplishing their goals. However, we've used the team report for teams that have been together, working together for years. And it also helps bring up some blind spots that they didn't even realize. We do know, again, like someone mentioned earlier, especially in APAC, there is a lot of turnover. That's why for that manufacturing plant, we actually did another intervention the next year. And there was some adjustments, but there was still some people who were also on the original team as well. And so just like you should be meeting together every probably 3 to 6 months to be aligning your goals, you can probably do another, you can start with a team report. And then if there's so many members that change and switch over, you could do a new team report. But still, even if you don't do another team report, aligning every like 3 to 6 months to make sure that we're adjusting our goals to become more effective, especially as we are changing as a team, is really best practices.
Okay. So there are a few questions here about if there are discrepancy between observation and data here. So what is your recommendation if the Hogan team report results are different from what the organization or what the leader is observing? Because there's another question here that tells about, now essentially this report is about aggregated numbers. So has there been any case from both of your experience as well, when you were challenged by the leader or the team, that maybe they tell you, this doesn't look like us, it doesn't sound like us, or we don't even observe this? How did you deal with that?
That's a great question. A lot of times when we see the team leader having a different observation from the team, there may be some sort of disconnect between the leader and the team. This is also why we do recommend starting with one-on-one feedbacks. It gives each individual the chance to share their perspective. A lot of times, I mean, I cannot tell you a specific case that someone has said this is completely different than what we have observed. We have observed differences in the awareness of the leader. We've seen where leaders think one thing and the team actually says something completely opposite. And that's usually seen in the data as well. So like we actually, you know, when we do a team report, we do recommend that the leader is a part of the team and you can see their results alongside the other members of the team. And if the leader's profile is completely different than the other team members, that actually gives us a data point to work with as well. To your point of like, it is an aggregate of data. So we do see that there are individuals that diverge from the team. And what's very interesting too, is we've seen cases in which like the team is just so completely different. And so if you have this team where everyone is playing a different role, then the average of that might not add up to what we're seeing the, you know, reputation of the entire team. And that's also another way that we can have a conversation. It's good to know that the team is, you know, extremely diverse. And the conversation becomes more about like, where are we going as a team? What do we want our brand to be? And how can we actually, are we working together effectively? Or is there different ways that we need to adjust? So great question all around. It gives you the opportunity to explore when there is a disconnect between what the leader is saying and what the team is saying and the overall data. But usually, again, because this is based on reputation, a lot of times it gives you a great conversation piece on that.
And I'll just add one thing, and Catherine, I think this, you know, potential disconnect is really where the value of a skilled facilitator like from Optimal can really add value to bridge that gap. Again, maybe it's an identity versus reputation, maybe it's a leader versus team, but there's that opportunity to explore, build that self-awareness at the team level and make a path forward.
Thank you. Now, so this is a slightly longer question.
Sure.
So now this is about whether Hogan has explored any instrument that measures a team as a system rather than an aggregation of individuals, largely because when we look at aggregated scores, sometimes she finds that it may tend to overlook the complexity of group relations, psychology, and systematic perspective. And with the fact that sometimes people often behave differently in teams as they would when they come together. So because of, you know, boundaries, roles, etc. So she would like to just explore, you know, are there any other ways of exploring this team other than just by an aggregation or a sum of these scores?
Yes, thank you so much for that question. In systems theory, we do understand that like looking at it from the top down can looking at the team from the top down, or looking at it as a complex, adaptive system is also very important. And in fact, Hogan has been doing recently some research in the past couple of years and we've developed a diagnostic called the Team Effectiveness
Diagnostic. Yes.
So the TED. And so actually, if you are interested, please contact Optimal. We've done some pilots in the US. We're hoping to get some more international data on this. But it is actually you going in and diagnosing the team itself versus just individual upwards. So, I mean, I would argue that one of the things that the systems thinking does, or, kind of group theory does forget about is the role of personality of individuals and how they undertake some of those roles. But I think that's an excellent point, as we can't ignore that like the team functions as a system within the overall broader organizational. So we have done some organizational diagnoses, like looking at the organization. And with this team effectiveness diagnostic, we are looking at the team, not just individual data aggregated upwards. So again, this is really some interesting research that I think if you're interested in learning more, you can reach out to Optimal and we can set something up for you. Nicole, did you have any other comments?
No. The only thing just to add is that the team effectiveness diagnostic is an additional 30 some odd survey. So we have the 3 core assessments and then that diagnostic survey. So that's a little bit different than the team report, which, as you've already mentioned, is just that aggregate, a different lens, but just based on the personality data.
Thank you.
Good question.
So is there a healthy team? What is considered a healthy team score as an overall? So let's say if there are certain individuals who are high performing, from their behavior, etc., their past performance, but they are not aligned to the broader team culture, then what can be done?
So I think there's 2 parts to that question. I'll jump in and then Krista, please add. So much like personality, there's not good and bad, right? There's strengths and weaknesses to being high on a scale, lower on a scale. And really in the same way, we can take that thinking up to the team level. So there's not one exact, perfect score for a team. We do recommend and hope that we can see some scores across all the different roles, because in order to be effective in moving your goals forward, you need all those different people to be in those different roles. So I would say a good mix is probably, a healthy team, but there's strengths and weaknesses to all, and there's opportunities to gain that awareness and to develop your behaviors if and as you are lacking something, like in my example, the process focus. But Krista, anything to add?
Yeah, the only thing I'd add to that is, we do see that diverse teams perform better, however, and are more effective. However, also let's not forget the context, right? Like I mentioned before, if we have an R&D team, we probably would be happy with the team, or we would probably see a more effective team if they did have higher on the innovation role, right? Mm-hmm. And so depending on the context, we may want to look at what is needed to accomplish those specific goals. And so that's another way to look at it. Although we do want diversity of thought across the entire team, it may be for leaders, for example, we probably would want to see some more results focused, maybe even innovation focused. But again, looking at the goals and what you're trying to achieve here. Catherine, remind us of the second part of the question is
alignment.
When you do see some, high performing individuals that don't seem to be aligned with the team, this is a great opportunity to, talk with those individuals, individually. I would say it would be kind of probably not as effective to address this as an overall team. Address those individuals individually, and then maybe see how you can work with them to align with the broader team. So that's kind of the advice. And Nicole, do you have any other thoughts on that?
No, I think that's exactly what I was going to say, particularly on that values piece. And I think that's the opportunity for whoever's leading the team to really be thoughtful and individualized in their kind of management of people. If someone is really high altruistic on a really low altruistic team, there's an opportunity that they're going to feel misplaced or not really aligning with the value of that team. So I think as Krista mentioned, just doing that on a one-on-one basis.
So the next question we have here is a little bit similar. So
Sure.
when we talk about behavioral change of the team, for example, if let's say the team in general lacks leader-like behavior, for example, not driven enough, lack of energy, etc., what could be the suggestion for this team to change then? So is it back to the context as well?
Yeah, exactly. I think there's two things that could be done. The first thing is, again, developing that self-awareness of the team and talking about what is needed to accomplish their goals. And so just, telling someone that they don't have enough, energy, or that they're not, driven enough is probably not helpful. But if you have set specific goals for them and say, hey, we need to accomplish this, how can we change our behavior and look at our natural strengths to achieve that? Is where you probably need to go with that team. And then the second would be to, in considering newer hires, considering how we can hire people who are more results focused. And again, with the thought that you have to do it slowly and incrementally. If you hire just like 2 people that are super results focused, they're probably going to run circles around that team and not be fit in, and they probably will leave more soon. But think about how you can hire some people that are a little bit higher on results focused. We worked with actually a financial institution in Southeast Asia to do something similar for their high potential team. They saw their high potential team was not as results focused. They were very high on dutiful. And so incrementally, they started hiring people who were not super high on results focused, but were moderately high. And so was able to bring the group average up a little bit and then slowly but surely change the dynamic of the team from a personality perspective. But from a more shorter term goal-oriented perspective, you can also work with the team to set the goals and then say, this is how we go to achieve. I don't think you're going to change the entire team's, personality, right? You're not going to change the team's reputation unless you add new people into the team, but you can change their behaviors by looking at the goals that you need to accomplish and then working with them to achieve those goals. Nicole, did you have anything to add?
No, that's great. Thank you, Krista.
So now this is part of a logistics questions as well. So how do you use a team report for more than 33 people in an organization in a team building event? So the leadership team comprises of 7 members. So I guess it's a question about when Nicole, you mentioned about, well, as a team, at least 3 people to start. But when it comes to also using this team report, is there a suggested number? So what is too many already, perhaps, or the minimal number you would suggest to at least see more insightful results?
So I think my I guess follow-up question is, for your consideration, looking at it again by that shared leader. So I don't know if there's 33 individuals reporting to one leader or if that's, broken up by 7 different managers. But, for the most probably effective use of the team report would be looking at it by who's that shared leader, because likely they are going to have the most tactical, interdependent tasks and shared goals. But Krista, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, that's a great point, Nicole. I think that it's important that we look at, I don't think you have their slides up, but you had the slide that shares specifically what we consider to be a team. And it's, interdependent tasks, making sure that we're succeeding or we're reporting to that one manager. So there's several things you could do. I mean, like you could look at the team report of leaders on their own and see what the leadership team looks like. If they're working together and reporting to one manager, a different leader, you could, there's a lot of things. We would need to know a few more specifics, but I think it's important that, we understand a little bit more about the context, but like Nicole said, I think looking at who's actually reporting, who they're reporting to, and who are working together is going to be key here.
And that second part about, are there any suggestion in terms of if the group gets too big, are they going to, essentially there are about numbers aggregated together. So if the group gets too big, are there any concerns, or if the group is too small? What would that be like? So any suggestion or tips when it comes to the group ideal group size or range when it comes to this team report?
That's a great question. I don't think the too small would be 2 people. So we won't create a group report for 2 people, but I do think that there is some merit in saying, this group is, or this team is too large, because it's very difficult to argue that, 50 people are going to have, each person will have interdependent tasks. So I think that, again, we can work with Optimal to see what we want to see. I also think we may cap the amount of people at 30 people. I need to check into that, but we do put a cap on it because of that reason. If a team gets too big, then it's not really going to be effective looking at the overall group results, being interdependent as a team. So we can get back to you on the details of like what the cap is, but I would say that probably around 20, under 20 is probably a good best practice for capping if you are going to do a team report. But 3 to 20 would probably be the sweet spot.
Right. Thank you. So one of the final question here, is there a readout session with the manager and the team on the Hogan team report? If so, what will be covered in the session?
This is actually more of a probably a question for Optimal. Optimal can help you structure like a team intervention in the way that you need. The one that I shared is what we did for that one project is we had one-on-one feedbacks, and then we actually met with the team leader and the HR leader together to talk about the goals for the team session. There are team interventions that we've done where we have sat down with the team and the overall, like the team leader to talk and debrief them first. And then we talked with the overall team. But we do have a specific team, like it's a half-day session where we spend with the team overviewing the results of the team. And we also, in certain cases, work with them on specific goals and setting goals for what they're trying to accomplish. So there's various processes we can use depending on the need that we're trying to accomplish. But Optimal, Catherine, I don't know if you have any other thoughts on that.
Yes, I think for that one, it will be like case by case as well. It would be better to understand, at least from the context, the objective perspective, what you want to aim and what was the goal or the purpose for this before we can actually cater some of this as well. But definitely when you talk about the readout session, when it comes to the manager and the team, there should be a shared section in terms of what we can see, what are some of the observations, are they aligned, what can be done next. So it can be catered case by case, I would say. So it would be good if you have any question, definitely feel free to contact us and email us as well, because these last two questions are more likely for us as well. Number one is, will and can the slides be shared? Yes, certainly. So if you're interested, feel free to drop us an email. We will be more than happy to pick up any information and share the slides with you. And second is the price of the team reports as well. Once again, with a different currency, it would be good if you can drop us an email. We can give you more information about that too. Okay, so it's almost perfect timing. These are actually all the questions that we have, and it's a good wrap-up time now that in view of just looking at the clock here. So if there are no further questions, this will actually bring us to the end of the presentation by Krista and Nicole. Thank you very much. Like what I've said, the slides can be shared. If you're interested, feel free to reach out to us. So thank you all for being with us here today, and let us know if there are any questions, any comments, and we look forward to seeing you in a future webinars. As you know, this is actually the last one we have for the year, but I'm sure we will have more next year. So follow us. We will keep you posted and updated for the future webinars as well. All right.
Wish everyone happy holidays, and for the Americans in the group, happy Thanksgiving today, and then happy New Year.
Thank you all so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.